Ezra asked the question yesterday, why does the halachic system even tolerate the notion of a minhag? How can you have such a thing as a minhag? It's crazy, because how many Torahs do we have? One. So what kind of idea is it to have locales develop their own minhagim? But it's a much more serious problem.
What came first?
You have an amazing idea. The Rambam says in Akdama L'Perush Mishnayos, I was going to raise this question now, but we're not going to get to it until later. Not today, like later. The Rambam says, he says, I'm sure you guys remember this, there's 5 categories of methods of derivation of halacha. Good. So he says in the 4th one, he says this. He says they create siyagim, right, to the Torah. Okay? And then he says this. He says, an example is basar of b'chalav. Okay? So basar of b'chalav is what? Is a...
Chicken is calling chicken.
Right.
And saying that you can't have it with...
milk. Okay? And that's a Durbanan. He says it's a Gzera Midurbanan. Kela harchik min avera. Right? V'lo ne'asar b'torah ela basar b'heima Torah. Avo asur chachamim basar ov kela harchik min ha'eser. So far, so good. V'yesh mehem shelo yigzor Gzera zu. All right? But the problem is that, this is where things get really weird, but it turns out that this Gzera wasn't what? No. Not everybody... not every Rav paskanat is Gzera. So what happened was, Rabbi Yossi Glili hayamatir basar of b'chalav. Right? So Rabbi Yossi Glili, in his town, he paskin. There's only one having basar of b'chalav, right? And the chol anshe iro hayu ochlam oso. Commotion is parsem etamud. Right. So what's the problem with that? What's the problem with the fact that you have a Gzera D'Rabbanan that says you can't have chicken with milk? Okay. But Rav Yossi Glili said, no, you can. And not only do you say you can, but the people in his city paskin like him. Why is that problematic? What does that appear like to be?
Going against the
Well, okay, so one problem it sounds like is lo cisco to do. How can you have something? How can you have a system where there's 2 socks that somehow coexist? Okay, now what do I mean by that? What I mean is that, and we're going to see this in this Gemara, just as in Hagdama. No. So what's the difference? The difference is very simple. It's one thing to say Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel argue Asur Mutter. Yeah. What's Beis Shammai always going to do?
Follow like Beis Hillel.
Exactly. Right. He's not going to. He doesn't get up in front of his shul and say.
His father's different, but they all
because you have external mechanisms like rope. But all of a sudden here, what the Gemara is tolerating, what Chazal are tolerating, is some sort of coexistence.
That's not 100% true.
50% of the time in Shas you're going to find a machlokes. Beis Shammai says X, Beis Hillel says Y, and you'll see this is the Gemara that discusses that. And 90% of the time, Beis Shammai passes like Beis Hillel. But there's very rarely the Gemara will say that Beis Shammai passed in a certain way, and their followers, the people in that yeshiva, did like Beis Shammai. But that's crazy, because now you're going to have a system. So it's not just a question of minhag, right? Minhag. You'll see how it applies to minhag, but it's a deeper question, because you have a tolerance in the system for multiple socks coexisting.
I mean, now I do have that all over.
There's another question you can ask, which I think is a more fundamental but very important question.
Was that the same supposed to do?
No. There's a problem with this. The Rambam says that it was a Gzera D'Rabbanan. Okay, so what does that sound like?
Minhag.
No. Okay, who made it up?
D'Rabbanan.
And who? Okay, so if we say D'Rabbanan, who are we talking about? Okay, so who was Anshe Knesset Dolo really mean? Better than Rov. Who does these things? Who makes up the Rabbanans? What are they? Okay, but what is Sanhedrin? Okay, it was always a product of Sanhedrin. So 1 second, if you're telling me that Sanhedrin came up with Basar Of V'Chalav, right? So and how could Rabbi Yossi Glili not follow Sanhedrin? Milan Mashach. If he's not following Sanhedrin, then that's what is he? He's a Zaki Mamre. Right? And if he is following Sanhedrin, and if he's allowed to not follow Sanhedrin, so what's the purpose of a Sanhedrin? I can put it in an American legal system point. Imagine the Supreme Court, let's put aside someone's a libertarian. The Supreme Court comes out and says, we'll use a modern day issue. The Supreme Court says that gay marriage is now legal in every state. It's a federal law. Okay? So the fact is, South Carolina, if some people can appreciate this, South Carolina comes along and says, oh, you know what? We're we're not buying into this law. So you have one or two possibilities. Either they're going to secede from the union, which they did, right? Or they're going to have to follow it because that's what the Supreme Court does. Supreme Court is the law of the land, right? So if Supreme Court can't impose their authority on everyone, then what's the point of a Supreme Court? If Sanhedrin can't come up with their Rabbanan and not impose their universal authority on everybody, what's the point of Sanhedrin then? Yeah. It's Gemara Yevamos, Yud Gimel Amabez. It starts with Tnan Hasam. Go.
Right.
So I know you guys reviewed this already in Hachana, but let's just get the question as precise as possible, okay? So the problem's like this. Chazal come along and have this idea of they create Purim, okay? Okay. In the creation of Purim, what do we have? So you have 2 days of Purim, right? 1 day's for the walled, and 1 day's for the okay. But there's another halacha on top of that, all right? This idea that you can lay Megillah earlier than Yudalid, okay? So what's the scene? The scene's going to be as follows, okay? I'm in Modi'in, and someone comes from Modi'in. Let's say Modi'in's the city, and you live in a kfar, a little village. And the Chashmonim, right? Chashmonim, I use that example a lot. So you're in Chashmonim, and you come to Modi'in. Chashmonim doesn't have any supermarkets, Modi'in does. And you got to buy your stuff for Seudah. So now that you're already here, what would you do?
You might as well hear Megillah also.
Well, lay Megillah, not hear it. Because it's Yud Beis. If I live in Modi'in, I'm not laying until Yudalid, okay? But if I'm a Chashmonim guy, I'm allowed to go to Modi'in on Yud Beis and lay then. But now you're going to have a problem. What's the problem? I'm a Modi'in guy. I walk outside, and what do I see? I see a guy leaning Megillah on what day? So what do I say to myself? Yikes. Right?
I forgotten.
Right. Or you say to yourself, Los is go to do, meaning it appears that there's a massive allowance for opposing halachas to exist, because how could it be that this guy can land in Yud Beis when I'm landing in Yudalid? What should they have done? What should Chazal have done?
Make everybody land.
Yudalid. That's it. Forget the issue of why. The question you can ask is, well, why did they even say Yudalid Tesvav? But remember, we answered that last year. The According to Ramban, it's really 1 day. Yudalid Tesvav, really 1 day. They split into 2. Don't worry if you don't understand that. It's okay. It's a different separate subject. Okay. So all right. So what does Rashi say about Los is go to do?
It says the Ner Knahagen, right? Yeah, the Ner Shtei Torahs.
Right. So Rashi says, what does it appear like to people?
Looks like there are 2 Torahs.
2 Torahs, right? 2 Torahs. Well, okay. What does that mean? What does that mean? What do you mean it appears like it's 2 Torahs? Tamir says, very good. It appears like there's 2 halachic systems, right? That's what Rashi's saying. It's a good conceptual step. In other words, Rashi's saying, what does 2 Torahs mean? It means that a person says to himself, there's 2 halachic systems, right? Okay. Keep going to Rashi. Why would he say that? Yudalid. Right. So what's going to happen is that it's like a mess, because I'm in the city and I see someone come in on an earlier date, and what's going to happen? He's landing on a different day than I land, right? And that creates this perception of 2 Torahs. Okay. Now let's go through the drush. I'm not concerned about defining the Havmina here, but there's a point I want to get out. So what's the drush?
Right. Hi, Los is go to do. Mi baile le gufia.
The gufe.
Gufe. Damar Achmana lo tasu chabura al mes. So you shouldn't make a bruise over a dead person. So if
the Isser was only lo sig, if the Isser was to make this wound, it should have just said lo sigodedu, right? The fact that it says my tisgodedu.
Is coming for this.
But now the Gemara has a counter.
Right?
Oh, so maybe lo sigodedu teaches you what? Only Shtei Toros, right?
Only about Shtei Toros.
Right.
And getting them across lo sigodu, right?
Right.
That just goes my los is godu.
Okay, so
Cutting and grips.
right. Okay, so now what was the question I asked before about that, which is something that should trouble you?
Why those 2 things?
Yeah, I mean, how can you darshan out 2 things which seem to have nothing to do with each other from Los is Godu? We don't like that. When it comes to drush in the Torah, what do we like? Clean. 1, right? Maybe 1.5. But to have 2, they do darshan out sometimes 2 things. But they darshan out 2 things, they'll darshan out 2 things that at least are on the same track, right? But here, what do you have? You can't what?
Cut yourself on this.
And you can't.
Break on the good.
Right. So I challenge you to unify those, to find me a theme that ties the 2 together. So the Rambam argues with Rashi. The Rambam's in Avodah Zarah Yud Beis. Halach Yud Gimel Yud Daled. Just do your Gimel Yud Daled. Go.
Right, so the two Torahs and cutting are one thing. Kshem shahayu halavodi kachavim starting b'vasram al masehem, so they would cut themselves over the
Mibnei
English. Mibnei Atzar from English. Kachayu chovolin ba'atzim la'avodas kachavim shenamar v'yiskodedu k'mishpata.
So he's saying. So I think Avi, you asked this before, but the point he's saying is that there's the idea of cutting stuff in anguish, which is related to an overall notion of this like worship out of cutting yourself in worship. Okay. Kind of like self-flagellation, but much worse. Right. So there's a differentiation if it's for the dead versus just stam avodah zara. Okay, fine. But what's the main point though? Hold on. The Rambam's just telling you the Isser Los is going to do the first way of learning it, and if you look at the pshat in every chumash, it's always going to say what? Los is go to do means what? Cutting yourself. Where is it brought down? Which parsha is it brought down in? So he says in this very azhara, meaning in this one Los is go to do, you learn out two things. And what's the second one? The second thing you learn out is that if you have two batei dinin in one city, and one's noeg like this and the other one's noeg like that, right? That's a problem. Why? Because this davar zeh gorem the machlokes gedola. So what's the Rambam's problem? The Rambam's problem is that it's going to lead to machlokes. Right. So you have a machlokes between Rashi and the Rambam about what the problem Los go to do is. Rashi holds it's a problem in Shtei Toros. The Rambam holds that it's a situation where you have two batei dinin in one city. And what's going to happen? Each one paskins A, one paskins B. Their adherents follow each one. And what's going to end up happening? You're going to have it's going to lead to machlokas gedola. So what's that machlokas? So they're concerned by the mace. So what are you doing? You're
not emotional.
What? Now, don't be too philosophical. It's still
he's in an unstable emotional state.
Okay, but you're sad when someone dies. Okay, what's weird about what this guy's doing?
In there.
Well, what's strange? If you saw this guy doing that, what would you say? Yeah. I mean, what?
He's strengthening his system.
He's
straying.
Why?
Yeah, that he's not satanic.
But no. We know you're not supposed to do it because the Torah says you're not supposed to do it. So I'm trying to understand what's the underlying emotion. There's a problem is you said before you're overreacting. But okay, so what's the overreaction? How is that expressed? Because what are you doing to yourself? You're hurting yourself, right? You could say that, okay, but I don't want to go that far. I'm saying there's an overreaction to this, okay? There's an overreaction where a person's faced with this sadness, right? And rather than act within a normal emotional way, you overreact. And the overreaction is expressed in hurting yourself. Because if I saw someone cutting themselves because someone died, I'd say, wow, you're going a little overboard with your sadness.
That's age are back too far off.
So if that's the case, so the question is, and I think this is a nice way of looking at it, I think, okay? In other words, let's understand what happens here, okay? Chazal come along, and they create this idea that you can lane Megillah early, okay? And now the Gemara says there's a chashash. What's the concern that's emerging? That people are going to say what? What are they going to say? Let's take which version do you want to take? Rashi or the Rambam?
Okay, so if you go by Rashi, then people would say that
there's
two Torahs.
Okay, so now let me ask you guys a question because you guys are a learned group, okay? If you saw a guy coming in on Yud Beis to Modi'in and landing, what would you say? So what's this telling us? In other words, when someone, what's the concern?
The Hamon?
The Hamon. Okay, and what's the concern we have with the Hamon?
That they're gonna go off the deep end.
Right. Okay. In other words, their problem is when they see the Hamon's hypersensitive. And this is the key point.
The system starts and where it ends.
Right. So the Hamon's hypersensitive to uniformity. It's not just an idea in creating that's Torah Achas and Mishpat Echad. The Hamon's hypersensitive to this stuff. Think about it in Minhagim, okay? And when people have, especially in America, when you go to America, and let's say, like I remember when I wore talis when I was over Bar Mitzvah, like before I got married, someone's like, oh, what are you doing? You're like over this or deraisa, like, what do you call it? You're condemned to kares, you know?
Let's go to do a deraisa or derma?
Deraisa.
Condemned
to
kares.
The Torah worries about...
So, one second. So the point I'm trying to bring out is like this. In other words, the issue of Lo Siskoto do is really rests on the problem that there's a reaction that people have when they perceive, even though in reality, of course, Chazal would never create a divergent system. That's absurd. But the problem is there's a sensitivity that the Hamon have. They overreact to that phenomenon. Okay, they overreact to it. Haraya, look at the Rambam. What does the Rambam say? Well, I'm going to give the story here for the machlokas, but which you guys will do. But when you have a machlokas with Bate Dinin, when you have competing positions in the ideal world, what should happen? No problem. No, I'm saying no. Forget that. Saying let's say in Modi'in, Rabbi X says something and Rabbi Y says something else. So and I follow Rabbi X and you follow Rabbi Y. So guess what? No problem, right? But what do people think?
He's not following Lachlan.
They say he's not following. No, that's exactly the point. They say he's not following halacha. He's not following halacha. That's the problem. That's how they perceive it. Right? They can't imagine such a thing as having a coexisting system. It's impossible. Yeah. I think you might be right. I just don't know if you are. 'Cause that's typical. But anyway, no. 1 second. Let me just say what I said before, and then I want to get the categorical definition. Whereas Rashi's saying what Rashi would say the problem is. I'm just describing each position. Rashi would say, what's the problem? The problem is a person sees in front of him. What's he going to say if you see the case of Megillah? What does the average person say? There's 2 Torahs, right? How can it be that a guy lands in Yud Beis and in Yud Dalet town? There's two Torahs. The Rambam is saying no. The Rambam is saying the problem is that each position wants to think that they're right. So when people see that, what they're going to say is, oh, it can't be they were both right. You can't have both right. That's impossible. Only one guy could be right. That's how the average person relates to the halachic system. Again, using the situation of Minhag. If I walk into it's not though. If I walk into a shul in America, it's close to the same problem, but there's a difference. If I walk into a shul in America and God forbid I wear a talis and I'm not married, people think that you're over Nisr D'Oraisa, which is absurd because it shows you because they can't tolerate. People have a certain idea of uniformity when it comes to these things. They can't imagine such a thing as a coexistence of these things. So what's the machlokas now? Rashi's simple. Rashi's saying that, like you guys have been saying this all along. Rashi's saying that what's the problem? The problem is the way he relates to the system as a whole. Because now he's going to see in front of him 2 parallel systems of halacha. That's what he sees. The system as a whole now is split into 2.
Okay, so
Shtei Toros. I agree. But what's the Rambam hold? Whereas the machlokas is like this. Exactly what you said. Machlokas is it machlokas about how they relate to the system as a whole, or is it within the system? Meaning the application of a specific. That's what you mean by prat. In other words, in a city, what's happening? So Beis Din A says mutter. Beis Din B says aser. So it's not that they say now there's 2 Torahs. They're not saying that. They're just saying now that it can't be they're both right. That's what you're focusing on insofar as the exclusion. But that's a product of a specific psak. It's not that they're saying there's 2 Torahs from Sinai. Rashi's saying they see 2 different systems as a whole. 2 different systems of Torah.
What does that mean? They can't. Is that they couldn't tolerate two?
No, I agree. I'm not disagreeing with that. No, I agree. But I'm saying the way you put it back to the Gemara. So now the Gemara says it is. Now comes a great maflokas. Okay, I love this maflokas. So the Gemara says, Amarle.
Arkan lo shenisa. Malcolm shnag lazos malacha. Ba'arab zachem achad sos. Osin malcolm shag.
Osin, comma.
Malcolm shnag lo shalo lazos enos.
Okay, so what's the kasha? So what I was saying, the Gemara's first point was, how can it be on, the Gemara says, the Chazal come along and Mesaking Megillah. And they say you can lay Megillah on your base, right? And that seems to be a problem Los go to do. So what's the comeback?
So here there is a thing.
No, what's the comeback? What's the comeback from the Gemara? The Gemara says, why would you ask that kasha? I have a good comeback to you.
By Minhag.
Well, don't use the word Minhag yet. Okay, so why is that a good counter to the kasha?
Because that was saying you can't do that.
Right, exactly. Yaakov got it. In other words, there's a precedent. We have a precedent in the halachic system, which is about Isser Malacha, about the minhag of not doing Malacha on Erev Pesach. So you have a precedent where the Gemara never says in Makom Shenagu, Los is go to do, right? So you have a precedent that exists that tells you this won't be a problem. So the Gemara says, what are you asking Los is go to do Megillah for? There's no reason to ask that question. Okay? Right. So what's interesting about what the Gemara is doing at this point?
Comparing cases.
Not just comparing cases, that always does that. Yeah. So Gemara at this point is doing what? It's saying it's equating, right, minhag to halacha. And how do I know that? Because what's the next line in the Gemara?
What is the next line in the Gemara?
So he says, so it's a great line. It says, I give you an example of what? Of Isser, right? Why? Because what does it say?
What does it say?
Damar of Shaman Bar Abba.
Amar Rabbi Yochanan lekayim es yimei Purim bizmanehem zmanim Harbe. It's like
Tiknu lahem chachamim, right? So one second. So they made a takana. So I'm giving you an actual real isser, a takana, something that Chazal as an entity came up with. And what are you telling me? Minhaga? What are you like? You're insane. What? That's just right.
Havivatanan Belela Beis Shammai Ostrin.
Right. Belayla halayla Beis Shammai Ostrin Beis Hillel Matirin. So what does that mean? What's that referring to? No. What's the case?
Oh, what?
Right. So the night. Look at Rashi.
I don't know. Where is it?
Second class now.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah. So
on the night, I mean, on Erev Pesach, meaning nighttime of Erev Pesach, right? The night before. In other words, Erev Pesach starts at night. So that night of B'dikas Chametz. So Beis Hillel matches malacha. Beis Shammai says it's not allowed to do malacha, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I was saying the Ika. Now look carefully. Rashi says the Ika da'avdei kebeis Hillel. What does that mean? What does that mean?
That they hold like
You go like X and you go like Y.
So some people follow Beis Hillel, and some people follow Beis Shammai. The Harekan, Agudos. Now you have a big problem. See, this is what I was trying to get at. This isn't a machlokes. Well, this isn't a machlokes anymore, where Beis Shammai says X, Beis Hillel says Y. What does Beis Shammai always do? Concedes, right? That's the way the game is played. There's a question like this. Let's just take a step back, okay? What's the Gemara's retort? The Gemara says, "Oh, 1 second. You tell me Isser, right? I tell you Isser. You tell me Minhag, right? Now, meaning what? Meaning that what's Rashi telling you? Meaning that when it comes to Isser, that you can argue Shtei Toros. But when it comes to Minhag,
that's just Machogas.
That's just Machogas.
Which is the wrong version.
From the top, okay? From the top. Again, the Gemara comes up with an interesting question. The Gemara says, you see Megillah, the Chazal are Masakein Yom Knisa, so Megillah could be read earlier, right? Okay. But the Gemara's question is, why is this not a problem Losis go to do? Forget what Rashi says. Right? Why is that a problem Losis go to do? Right? It sounds like it's Losis go to do. Agudos, right? You have some dudes doing it on your Daled, and in the same town, you have other guys doing it on your base. That's crazy, right? That's not Losis go to do. The Gemara says you can't even ask that question. Why? Because your question assumes that there's no precedent for this. But there is a precedent. Isser Malacha on Erev Pesach, right? The minhag in one city is not to do it. Minhag in another city is to do it. Doesn't that sound? If there were a problem, Los is going to do. What should the Mishnah in Arbi Pesachim in Makom Shanago said?
Ask on that. Is that Los?
No, it should have said Los is going to do, but it doesn't. So the fact that it doesn't tells you that whatever you think Los is going to do is, you're wrong. Right? You're wrong. So then he says, well, 1 second, what are you talking about? You're giving me, if you showed me there are comparable cases, I'd agree with you, the question's a ridiculous question. But they're not comparable cases. Why? Because one's talking about halacha, there you can have agudos, but by the case of minhag, so it leads to machlokas. We'll have to explain what that is. But that's not agudos. That's not agudos. So how can you compare the two? Okay? You understand that now? A lot of little ha'im maskanas here. Ha'im maskana. Now, so what's the Gemara's comeback? So the Gemara's comeback is what? So the Gemara says, well, 1 second. But we see there's a Mishnah that says what? In the Mishnah it says, Beis Shammai's Asers and Beis Hillel Maters. So we're not talking anymore about Minhag. Rather, we're talking about what? Isser. So now what have we now done? We've now equated the cases again, right? We've now brought back. The Gemara looked at Minhag and Isser equally. Then the Gemara says that's absurd. Isser's here and Minhag's here. Now the Gemara has to have a comeback to keep the question on the table. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. I'll show you a case of Isser. Okay? You understand? All right?
How is that making it same as Minhag?
It's not. He agreed. The Gemara agrees. The Gemara agrees that Minhag is not a problem of agudos, which we have to answer. Why not? The Gemara thought Minhag would be a problem of Los Go to do. Kamashman, that's not a problem Los Go to do. But now the Gemara has to bring a case in. So the Gemara has to bring a case in, right? To keep the question on the table, has to show us another case where also you should say the same problem of Los Go to do exists. And why should Los Go to do exist by the case of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? Because in that machlokas, it wasn't just that they argued with each other, but rather they told their adherents followed what they said. So now what's the Gemara's? Now the Gemara says, Amalei, you should know this. You should know what he says. Amalei. So 1 second. So Gemara's answer is a very good answer. Why won't the machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel be agudos agudos? Very simple. Because if I'm not doing malacha, what's someone going to say?
Nothing.
You should remember this from the case we just
I'm not
did.
going to say anything because he's just going to say it's batal.
Yeah, Yoshev Batal. You understand? In other words, you're not worried. It's an interesting thing. The Gemara's move now is to say, why is it not a problem of agudos agudos? So the Gemara is saying we can tolerate their followers passing against each other. Why? Because there'll never be nicker in one of them that what? That they're arguing. In other words, if it's an isser, if you're telling me Beis Shammai holds that you can't do malacha and Beis Hillel holds you can, right? So let's say you're a Beis Shammai guy, and you walk and you see let's say you're a Beis Hillel guy and you see a Beis Shammai guy. What's Beis Shammai guy doing?
It's in there.
Doing nothing. So you're never going to come to the distortion of Los Go to do, right?
So
that would seem to answer the problem Los Go to do, right? Except for
the first.
this final move.
Wait.
V'ha Beis Shammai matirin hatzaros la'achim u'Beis Hillel osrim. Okay, that's the final case. All right, and then we're going to get to part 2. The final case of the Gemara is okay. So that's I don't want to get into all the details. Of course we do. Let's want to get all the steps down. Then we go back and take each svara. But the Gemara's last step in this sequence, before we get to the next sequence, the Gemara says, So what? I'm not going to start the next sequence yet. So the Gemara says, what must you therefore? What is the problematic case of Losis go to do? Beis Shammai. Okay, so the case by Tsaros by Yibum. All right. So what's the case there? Everyone familiar with what Yibum is?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there's the question is there's certain questions about who's allowed to marry the woman. Okay. Point is machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel about who can marry the woman. And what happened here is when it says Matir Natsaros La'achim Beis Hillel Osrim, what happened was that Beis Shammai's followers followed Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel's followers. No, I'll tell you the case in a second. But they both followed each position. But why is that critical to say here? Because what happens in this situation? Because there you can't use Yoshev. You can't say Yoshev Batal. It's clear that one side's passing A and the other side's passing B. So it doesn't matter what the case is. The Gemara, I'll tell you the case in a second. The Gemara is creating a scenario now where it's a clear, and this is crazy because now you have a situation where Beis Shammai taught. It's not like Beis Shammai. What should Beis Shammai have done? He should have said, okay, normal.
Give svara, but go like that.
Go like the road, because we always pass like. You'll see, we always pass like Beis Hillel. But what did they do here? Beis Shammai said, you're more than welcome. You guys can follow my psak. And Beis Hillel says, you guys can follow my psak. So the Gemara says, how's it not a agudos agudos? How is it not a agudos agudos?